Imagine a smell. But don't just think of a bad smell. Don't think of your neighbor's trash on a hot July afternoon. Think of a smell so thick, so heavy, and so pungent that it can peel the paint off the side of a wooden ship. A smell that fills your lungs like hot lead and makes your eyes weep. In the middle of the 19th century, thousands of men spent their entire lives breathing in that very smell. They were standing on islands made of nothing but bird droppings, and they weren't there because they were crazy. They were there because those droppings were the most valuable commodity on the planet. This was white gold. People fought wars over it. Empires were built on it. And believe it or not, the food on your plate today exists because of the contents of a bird's stomach from 180 years ago. Welcome to the era of guano. This is the story of how a mountain of poop saved the world, built an empire, and then, in a twist of cruel irony, helped kill 1 million people in Ireland. Let us start with a mystery. Why Peru? There are birds everywhere in the world. There are seagulls in New Jersey and pigeons in London. Why weren't people mining the sidewalks of New York City for treasure? The answer lies in a perfect geological and biological accident. Off the coast of Peru, there is a massive current of cold water called the Humboldt Current. This current pulls up nutrients from the deep ocean, creating a buffet of anchovies and sardines. This attracts millions upon millions of seabirds. We are talking about Guano cormorants, Peruvian boobies, and pelicans in numbers that would blacken the sky. These birds eat, and naturally, these birds go to the bathroom. They do this on a group of small rocky outcrops called the Chincha Islands. Under normal circumstances, rain would wash the droppings away. But the coast of Peru is one of the driest places on Earth. It almost never rains. Over thousands of years, the droppings piled up. They didn't rot. They didn't wash away. They just sat there baking in the sun, concentrating their nitrogen and phosphorus. By the time the rest of the world realized what was happening, the piles of poop on the Chincha Islands were over 150 feet deep. That is a 15-story building made of pure fertilizer for the indigenous Incu people of South America. This was common knowledge. They knew that if you put a little bit of this white powder on your corn, the crop would explode in size. They protected the birds with their lives. Under Incu law, anyone who set foot on the islands during the breeding season or killed a guano bird could be executed. They understood the value of the cycle. But the Europeans? They were late to the party. By the early 1800s, Europe had a massive problem. They were running out of dirt. Well, not literally running out of dirt, but their soil was exhausted. For centuries, farmers had planted the same crops over and over. The nutrients were gone. Wheat was thin. Potatoes were small. People were terrified of something called the Malthusian trap, the idea that the human population would grow faster than the food supply, leading to a global famine that would wipe out civilization. Then, in 1840, a German chemist named Julius von Liebig published a book. He proved that plants didn't just need water and sunlight. They needed specific chemicals, mainly nitrogen and phosphorus. Suddenly, everyone remembered those stories of the stinky islands in Peru. The first few bags of guano arrived in London and Baltimore, and the results were like a magic trick. You put the powder down, and the next morning the crops looked like they had been on steroids. The demand went from 0 to 60 in an instant. This triggered what historians call guanomania. Between 1840 and 1870, Peru exported millions of tons of guano. The price was astronomical. At one point, bird poop was more expensive than high-quality grain. The Peruvian government became one of the richest in the world overnight. They were the original petrostate, but instead of oil, they had bird droppings. But as the money started flowing, the darkness started creeping in. Because here's the thing about mining a mountain of poop. Nobody wants to do it. It is backbreaking, lung-destroying work. The dust is so caustic it can burn the skin off your hands. It gets into your eyes. It makes you cough up blood. The Peruvian government didn't want to use their own citizens for this. So they turned to one of the most shameful labor practices in history. They turned to the coolie trade. Thousands of men, mostly from the province of Guangdong in China, were lured onto ships with promises of good wages and gold mining jobs in California or Peru. They were called chuzai, or little piglets. When they arrived at the Chincha Islands, they realized they had been sold into slavery. They were trapped on rocky cliffs with no trees and no escape. Armed guards forced them to shovel guano into giant bags 12 hours a day in the blistering sun. The conditions were so horrific that hundreds of these men chose to commit suicide by jumping off the cliffs into the rocky surf below, rather than spend another day breathing the white dust. The green fields of England and America were being fed by the lives of men who had been kidnapped from the other side of the world. It was the white gold built on red blood. While this was happening, the United States was getting jealous. The British had a near monopoly on the Peruvian trade, and American farmers were complaining that the price of poop was too high. The U.S. government, never one to let a business opportunity go to waste, did something absolutely insane. In 1856, they passed the Guano Islands Act. This law, which is actually still on the books today, allowed any American citizen who discovered a deposit of guano on an unclaimed island to claim that island as part of the United States. It was the 19th century equivalent of finders keepers. This triggered a global scavenger hunt. American sailors went fanatically searching every corner of the Pacific and Caribbean. If they saw a rock with a bird on it, they stuck an American flag in it. This is why, today, the United States owns places like Midway Atoll, Johnston Atoll, and Baker Island. We didn't want the land for military bases yet. We just wanted the bird poop. The American empire literally began as an empire of fertilizer. But as the world was feasting on the bounty of Peru, a silent killer was hitching a ride. This is where the story takes a turn for the suspenseful. In the 1840s, the very same ships that were carrying guano from the South American coast to Europe were also carrying small crates of potatoes for the crew to eat. And inside those crates, hidden in the soil, were the microscopic spores of a fungus called Phytophthora infestans. Late blight, before the guano trade, South American plant diseases usually stayed in South America. The Atlantic was too wide, and the ships were too slow, but the guano trade changed the shipping lanes. The ships were faster, the volume of cargo was higher, and the frequency of travel was intense. In 1843, the blight appeared in North America. In 1844, it hit the ports of Belgium and France, and in 1845, it arrived in Ireland. The irony is almost too painful to describe. The Europeans were importing guano because they wanted to increase their food production. They wanted to make their potato harvests bigger and better. But the very ships that brought the miracle fertilizer also brought the plague that would destroy the most important crop in the world. In Ireland, the results were apocalyptic. The Irish population was almost entirely dependent on one variety of potato, a lumper. It was a monoculture, much like the rubber plantations of China. When the fungus hit, the fields turned black overnight. One day, a farmer had a field full of food. The next, he had a field full of rotting, stinking slime. Because the population had boomed, partly because of the agricultural advances of the previous century, there was no safety net. 1 million people died of starvation and disease. Another 2 million fled across the ocean to America. The landscape of Ireland was permanently scarred, all because of a stowaway on a guano boat. The poop war didn't end with a fungus, though. As the guano on the island started to run out, the tension between the South American nations boiled over. Chile, Peru, and Bolivia went to war in 1879. It was called the War of the Pacific, but historians call it the 10 Cents War or the Guano War. It was a brutal conflict fought over the rights to tax and mine the bird droppings and the nitrates found in the Atacama Desert. Thousands died. Borders were redrawn. Bolivia lost its only access to the sea, becoming a landlocked nation to this day. All for the right to shovel dust. By the beginning of the 20th century, the era of guano was dying. The birds couldn't keep up with the human demand. We had mined a 15-story mountain down to the bare rock in less than 40 years. We were back to the same problem. How do we feed a world that won't stop growing? The answer finally came from the laboratory, not the bird's nest. 2 German scientists named Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch figured out how to pull nitrogen directly out of the air using extreme heat and pressure. This is the Haber-Bosch process. It is the reason why we have synthetic fertilizer today. It is estimated that half of the nitrogen atoms in your body right now were created in a factory using this method. We don't need the Chincha Islands anymore. We have the atmosphere. But we shouldn't forget the birds. The guano age was the first time humanity realized that our survival depended on a global supply chain. It was the birth of industrial agriculture. It showed us that we could overcome the limits of nature, but it also showed us the cost. It cost the lives of the Chinese laborers. It cost the sovereignty of the indigenous people. It cost the stability of the Irish population. And it gave us a world where a disaster in a small group of islands in the Pacific could lead to a famine in a village in the Atlantic. The silence of the rubber forests in Sichuan, Bana, the buzzing of the British flybees, the drowning of the Chinese valleys by the sweet potato, and the stench of the Guano Islands are all part of the same story. It is the story of the Hama Gen, Ocene. It is the story of a planet being mashed together by our own ambition, We think we are the ones in control. We think we are the masters of the game because we can make fertilizer from the air. But look at the history of the guano trade. It teaches us that nature always has a surprise waiting in the cargo hold. Whether it is a fungus, an invasive ant, or a drought, the systems we build are only as strong as the biological threads that hold them together. The guano birds are still there on the Chincha Islands. Their numbers are much smaller now, but they are still fishing, still eating, and still contributing to their small, white mountains. They don't know about the American laws or the Chinese coolies or the Irish famine. They don't know that their droppings were once the blood of the land that fueled a global revolution. They are just living their lives in the Humboldt Current. Maybe there is a kind of humor in that too. While we were busy redrawing maps and sinking ships and arguing in the halls of Congress over who owned the rights to the poop, the birds were the only ones who actually knew what they were doing. They were just being part of the earth. We were the ones who tried to turn them into a bank account. So the next time you go to the supermarket and see those giant aisles of food, think about the smell. Think about the white dust. Think about the crazy 30 years, when the entire world was obsessed with what a bird left behind. We like to think of our history as a series of grand ideas and noble battles. But sometimes, history is just a story about a very lucky pile of bird droppings, and a world that was hungry enough to do anything to get it. The guano age is over, but its legacy is in every bite of bread you take. We are the children of the white gold. We are the descendants of the poop empire. And in a world that is still trying to figure out how to feed 8 billion people without destroying the planet, we might find ourselves looking back at those rocky islands and wondering if we really learned the lesson they were trying to teach us. Because as any Peruvian booby could tell you, what goes around comes around, and usually it's not as sweet as it looks. Stay curious, keep an eye on the sky, and remember that the most valuable thing in the world might just be lying at your feet, waiting for someone to realize that even the lowliest thing has a part to play in the grand, messy, stinky drama of our existence. The birds are still watching, and the mountains are still growing, one drop at a time. This is the silent power of the guano, the hidden history of agriculture, and the reminder that the earth has a very strange sense of humor when it comes to the things we call treasure. Thank you for listening to the story of the white gold. Now go out there and enjoy your dinner. You know exactly what went into it. The world is connected in ways you never imagined, and sometimes the connection is as thin and as powerful as a single, white, dusty spore from a distant island across the sea. The era of the British fly and the fire ant and the silver mountain might be in the books, but the era of the earth is far from over. See you in the next chapter of our global survival.